Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the AI InterConnect podcast, where we speak with the people building the future of PropTech, FinTech, compliance, and AI-powered business systems. I'm Laurent, your host, and today I'm joined by David Stifter, founder and CEO of PredictAP, a purpose-built automation platform that's rethinking how real estate firms manage account payable. And David, great to have you here. Very happy
Yeah,
to have you on the show.
thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to talk about all sorts of things today.
Wonderful. Let's get it right. Then, David, before we get into PredictAP, it's called PredictAP,
Yeah,
correct? Huh?
PredictAP. It's one of those things when you're founding a company, you throw a lot of names at the door. And so we're predicting how you code invoices. And so after
Yeah,
hours and
makes
hours
sense.
and hours of the family and friends going back and forth on it, we're PredictAP accounts payable. So that's the one that won. And so far, so good.
I love it.
Yeah.
And then I want to hear, before PredictAP, I want to hear your story. You have held leadership role across finance, tech. What led you to start PredictAP? What problem did you see that others were ignoring? Was there a specific moment where you knew this had to be built? It's three questions,
Yeah.
but it's your story.
Yeah. It's an interesting story. And I think it touches on a really key thing for any business and any tech. I think so often technology focuses on the technology, right? The shiny tool that you want to apply. And I think particularly with AI, that's the goal. I think the reality is that the business problem should be the goal, right? Understanding, hey, this is a real issue and it doesn't matter the tool. How do you solve that? And for me, my background, I've always been a geek at heart. So ever since I was a little kid, I loved technology and computers and making things work, automating things. And so I'm of the age where I was in college with the dot-com boom and crash. And so I had a dot-com and I was planning my retirement at 19, 22 years old when my dot-com got bought. And a few weeks before graduation, the dot-com crash happened and reality set in. And so I was scrambling to find a job, and the only job I could find was as a custody fund accountant. So going way back in time, and custody fund accountants, they're the kind of the lowest tier of accountant, which is they calculate the net asset value of mutual funds. So when you buy a mutual fund, what is the value of it? And it's a very tough job. You have market closes, half an hour, you figure it out. If you do it wrong, they fire you. That's, every day you're just doing that. And so that was where I found myself after college. And I have this again, this problem where I can't help but solve problems. My wife can't stand it because she can never just tell me a problem and have me listen. It's about like I got to go figure it out. And so in that role, an entry level role, and I noticed that there was points where there was a lot of friction in the process. So we had half an hour to do this work, and one of the key frustrations was we had to go with Bloomberg machines, one Bloomberg machine per floor with like 200 accountants trying to get in there and type their QSIPs and get your numbers, and we were elbowing each other out of the way. And that was the start of realizing like, hey, there's a lot of inefficiency in the world of finance. And so I was always struggling every day to get through that. And I started to research. I was like, there's got to be a better way. And this is back in the day of floppy disks. And I figured out a way to find a floppy disk and like pre-code my QSIPs, my 30 QSIPs, and put the disk in the machine, hit a button, and get it out and go. And so my 3 minutes or 5 minutes in this critical time turned into 10 or 15 seconds in this critical time. And that was great. That was important. And I realized like, there's a couple thousand accountants doing the same thing. And I went to my bosses and I said, hey, this is a better way to do it. And that was the start of my career. It's bringing the understanding of a business problem with some technical capabilities to solve that business problem and leading to something better. And so my role there evolved over time into process improvement and trying to figure out how to automate lots of things. And so I did that, got my MBA, and looked for, onto my next challenge, which was Colony Capital. And so there I was thinking Colony Capital is a very large private equity firm. So it owns real estate across the world, office, industrial, multifamily data centers. They even owned some crazy assets like Paris Saint-Germain before the current good owners. We were the previous bad owners. If you're a soccer fan, I apologize. But there I went off. I wanted to get away from the tech side. It's funny. You never really leave your strength, I think, and be an analyst on the acquisition side. And so I started off as an analyst role. But again, I started noticing these inefficiencies. Like, well, why are we typing that 3 times in Excel? Why are we, what are we doing there? Why am I taking information from this thing and typing it into that thing? So I started improving process again. I can't help myself. And the core system that we used there was a system called Yardi. And Yardi is the predominant accounting system for real estate. So it's a very particular thing, interesting company in history, but they're the winner of how do you deal with real estate accounting. And so started getting into doing more and more automations. And they said, Dave, you're pretty good at this. Why don't you run Yardi for us in addition to other things? And so over my career, I had a lot of different roles there. And I was at Colony for almost 20 years. And at the end there, I ended up as managing director leading technology. And it was the same thing of trying to really understand the business, trying to build allies within the business, and then solving the problem for the business. And there's a variety of technical tools that came to bear. And sometimes it's glamorous AI, sometimes it's a macro, sometimes it's just a better process of who's involved. And so that led me to, we had a very big project at Colony where we had a number of systems across the world and we wanted to unify them. And with that project, we were looking at where is time being spent? Where's kind of time and risk? And real estate or real estate private equity firms spend a lot of time on paying bills. You could imagine every office building or apartment complex pays hundreds and hundreds of invoices, fixing the leaky faucet, mowing the lawn, tenant services, construction, cleaning, all of these things generate lots of activity. And the nature of paying the bills is not as easy as you and I paying our personal bills where you write a check or get your credit card and just pay it. The structure of how these things are owned, it's very complicated because of debt and tax and other things. Hundreds, if not thousands of entities around the world that are in the ownership structure. That's very complicated. If Colony Capital is paying a bill, like Colony Capital LLC is not typically paying the bill. It's some subset of entities for a particular fund. And then on the bottoms up level, the accounting work of how do you actually account for this is very complicated because in real estate, many expenses are passed through to the tenants. So you can pass it through if it's allowed in the lease. Maybe you have to pay it if it's more of a capital improvement. So understanding when you do and don't code it a certain way is very knowledge intensive. And so we had recognized this as a very knowledge intensive, difficult task. And we broke it into 3 parts. So part 1 was the actual payment. So check wire, ACH in Europe, there's BACA and SEPA. So how do you actually go make a payment? And so we created an automation to do that because before we were doing accounting and then switching moving to another screen and going into the bank portal and typing it all in again, double work, right? Back to this thing. I can't stand double work. And then, so I was like, okay, do it once. That's one of my core philosophies. You do something once and it should feed everyone. Got the payments going well. Bank rec automation, so ticking and tying the stuff that's paid. Workflow and approval, that's in the middle. Should we pay this or not? Having that electronic. And then so those things we solved pretty well. And then you have this upfront piece of, hey, you have hundreds of thousands of invoices coming in, and you still have that knowledge problem of how do I actually do it? How do I actually code it? And this is where we just had some smart people that have been working in the company for years and years that just knew it. And so they know, oh, it says this, but it means that. I'll write a post-it note and do it. And this is similar. I try to make an analogy. This is similar to your local coffee shop or local bakery where you walk in and they know what you want, right? You don't say, hey, it's Monday morning. I'm tired from the weekend. I really need a double espresso to get my day going. They know, hey, Monday morning, Laurent comes in. This is what he wants to get his week started, right? And you say hi. They know your name. And you don't, they just give you what you want. And there's a good feeling about that. It's not on the menu like Laurent's Monday special, right? But they just figure it out, your usual. And so that's that kind of unspoken knowledge, that tribal knowledge, that's a really hard thing. And so we had really depended upon a small number of folks that knew this well. And one in particular is this woman, Krissa, who was the head of accounts payable in our company. And she'd been there for 30 years and she knew it all, right? If I had a question on how to pay a bill, or the CFO had a question, like she would know. And so after we made these big changes, she retired and it's like, oh my gosh, well, we can't pay a bill anymore. We're a 60 billion asset under management company. And it's like, we can't pay a bill because Chris is not there. That's an issue. And so I went and tried to find technology to help my team understand those implicit rules. And a lot of firms at even this is going back 6 years, claim to use, even back then, some were claiming to use AI, some were claiming to solve this coding problem. And I think they did for more generalist industry agnostic ways, like manufacturing is a little more simple or other industries may be more simple, but for real estate, too complicated. And so trying proof of concepts, trying different ways, robotic process automation or templates or different things, and just realizing that they're not working. And so that's where I've still been a geek. I've still kept in touch with understanding what the new technology is and trying some of these new AI tools as I realized this is a really good use case and again, I started with the business problem and the business limitations and then tried different tech to get to that solution. And here I realized, hey, there is a pattern, right? So it says one thing, but it means something else, but there's some consistency to it. And a person can figure out that pattern. Number two, there's good structured data. So back 5-6 years, the bigger issue around using ML and AI was around data annotation, right? And the first step of any AI project was go annotate data. Go tag 1 million fields on 1 million records, and then you can start doing things. And that's a little bit scary because you're investing a lot of time and money into something that's an unknown. Is it going to pay off or not? But I realized with this problem, well, every time we paid a bill, we annotated the data, right? We said, here's the image, here's what I care about in the end, right? Do I care about that total? Well, it's a utility bill. I actually don't because they're always a period behind. I care about current charges, right? So that's the thing I'm tagging for total. So we have annotated data, we have a pattern. And then the third thing, which turns out is very critical because AI cannot be trusted. It is a very enthusiastic intern that wants to make you happy and it will lie to you to make you happy, right? If you're like, who's the most handsome man in the world? It's like, well, Dave Stifter, of course. It's like, well, thank you for lying to me. AI will tell you what you want to hear. And so having a person in the loop that checks this is really important. And so with this process of paying invoices, fundamental to accounting is segregation of duties. Yeah, you can never have a process. This one person is, creating a service, approving the service, and paying for the service. That's fundamentally a flawed control. So with accounts payable, you always have at least two people in the loop, right? Someone's reviewing a payment to make sure it's right. And this was great because it gave a feedback mechanism to when things change. We sold this, we bought this, and there's someone to say, no, this has changed. And so, yeah, okay, we have a mechanism to tell the model when it's changed. So those things coming together led to a really great use case for AI. And so when I had looked for solutions, I talked to a bunch of other the chief technology officers, CTOs, CIOs, and said, well, what are you doing? And, they had some ideas and mostly throwing bodies at it. And when we had done this, I went back to them and showed them what we came up with. And they said, well, this is really great. And so for me personally, my role at Colony was changing where the company was changing a little bit and it was less about building and more about maintaining, which was less exciting to me, less problems for me to obsess on. And so I realized this was a really good problem. I realized there wasn't a good solution in the market. I realized this new technology was kind of a better, different way to handle it. And I thought, well, maybe I should. And everyone always has these like, hey, this is how I'd run a company. And so I had this desire to build something, from a company perspective. And so that was the foundation of PredictAP, just understanding from the business reality, here's a real problem, here's a real solution. Lots of people have this problem. Nobody solved the problem. Let's go do it. And I will say for the first 6 months, I had this huge fear that I would talk to some prospective customer and they were like, oh, haven't you heard about Yak AP? They do it perfect. And, they've solved what you're doing. I was always worried I just didn't find the one that was doing it, but pretty confident now there wasn't and isn't someone doing exactly what we do. That was my big fear after jumping off that. So that was the foundation of PredictAP.
Okay. I love it. Wonderful. Okay. Then now we are at PredictAP. Then let's unpack what PredictAP does day to day for someone managing AP across 100 properties. What's the real difference when PredictAP is in place?
Yeah, it's difficult sometimes for us to articulate what we do and how it's different. And so again, back to that concept of three parts of paying a bill: the actual payment, the workflow and approval, and then what we'll call ingestion and coding. And so there's a lot of options in the market. Yardi has their P2P and PayScan. There's Nexus. There's Avid. There's a variety of tools. What they really, really care about fundamentally is payments because the payment processor makes a lot of money. That's the goal and focus for them. You can think about that as the gold mine because you get a percent of spend, and these companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year. That's incredibly lucrative. So they're looking at this holistic thing, and what they really care about doing well is payments. And so there's not a lot of attention paid to this ingestion and coding part up front. And we made a choice at the start, which was, do we create an entire platform that does all three pieces? Or do we focus on this very particular ingestion and coding problem that isn't addressed well and be synergistic to those other platforms? So back to the gold mine analogy, if payments is the gold mine, we could be the pick, shovels, and Levi's jeans of the gold rush, right? This kind of customer painful, necessary part of the process up front. And that's what we decided to do. So we sit in front of your AP platform. So if you're on Yardi PayScan, we work with it. We're Yardi integration partner. It's great to have that all within your one system. Or the same thing with Nexus. Nexus is integrating with MRI. Great. Like, we'll sit in front of that. We're not disrupting your existing process. That's really important. I'll talk about that kind of change management a little bit later. But the flow you have is your vendors are sending you invoices, typically via email or some inbox. So we don't change that. We think our customers, it's interesting, as I see how other companies try to create barriers to exit, they're like, we'll own your inbox. And it's like, well, if they own your inbox and you don't like them, that's pretty tough to tell people to send somewhere else. But we say, customers, own your inbox, hits the inbox, auto forwards to us, and we are tech in the middle. So it flows straight through us into your existing AP workflow approval system. So what we do is we take your history of how you've paid all these bills. You don't have to sit in a room with us for 6 months. And these are some things that were fundamental, where a lot of AI maybe has people in the loop, or you augment it with templates or things like that. We didn't want to do any of that. We didn't want to have our customer have to explain to us, well, if you see this, do this. That's what the AI should pick up on. That's what our AI does pick up on. So we take your history, build a model for you, sit in there. As invoices come through, we're going to code them. And by code, this is really important differentiator. There's a lot of OCR, optical character recognition solutions. That's kind of the last generation of technology. That does a really good job of scraping that which is on the paper off the paper. So if it says total and I want to pay a total, great. But again, back to that example of utility, well, I may not always want to pay a total. Or an example of, hey, it says Colony Capital as who's paying it, but really it's, 123 Main Street and 560 Park Avenue. It's really something else, something counterintuitive to what's on the paper. And that's where your team just knows it. Back to the coffee shop example, that understanding what's my usual, right? Because OCR is very literal. I want this particular line item from the menu, not this is the way I like it special. And AI can do a good job of understanding your personal preferences on this. And so it goes through it codes. We get the header, invoice number, total due date, which is what the OCR does. But then this detail coding around how is the accounting treatment actually done? Is it capitalized? Is it expensed? Is it recoverable? Is it not? What entities is it actually applying to? That's very, very complicated. It's lots of if-thens, thousands and thousands of permutations. So we do that really, really well. Send it through, and then you're in your existing process. So it's minimally disruptive to your customers, to the internal folks in the company. They're used to looking at something and approving it in the system. That doesn't change. Just what's changed is, instead of having a fully manual process at the start to get it in there, it's automated. And instead of taking, a few days to sit in a queue and go through and process, now it's, 20 seconds later, it's in there. They process per normal. Every night, we take everything that's approved and it feeds back into our engine. So they don't even know that they're actually annotating data for us. They're making corrections. It comes back to us and we retrain the model. So it's an invisible feedback cycle that's already taking advantage of their existing process cycle, which is really nice. So minimally disruptive on that. Because I think a lot of challenge with any change is disruption of a process. And I've yet to meet a business where they just have plenty of free time to blow up a process and start over. And the risk associated with that is high. And so we've tried to make this as pain-free as possible. It takes about an hour of technical time for the customer. So that's the workflow. Vendor sends, we process with the really detailed coding, send downstream to Yardi and Nexus, which are the two accounting systems in real estate, learn from it every night. And the other part of it is, it's always exceptions, right? There's always things that are one-offs, and new vendors. They send a picture of a roof instead of the actual invoice. Something like, there's always things that come up. And so our app has really turned into exception management, where for large companies, you could have, even with very, very high accuracy in the kind of high 90%, you're going to have hundreds of exceptions. We try to make them very, very granular. This is another thing that I realize is important to customers at scale. Is if I have a bucket of 100 problems and I have to go find my 5, that can be difficult, as opposed to, hey, here's your 3 problems, right? So we may not know exactly what the vendor is because we never used that vendor before. It's brand new, but we know it's for this person in this property. And so I'll say, Laurent, here's your 3 exceptions for today. And so our app is really about granular exception management, which lets them process really efficiently. And that's it. It's a very specific, very narrow and deep use case. And we want to be, and I think we've kind of shown ourselves to be the best at this use case of coding real estate invoices. So real estate AP is our clear focus on the ingestion coding part.
Yeah, I love it. It's great. Okay, you mentioned that, you mentioned it many times, that you integrate with platform like Yardi or MRI. How critical are those connections to client success?
Yeah, I think this is another area where AI companies are underestimating the importance of fitting into existing workflows. I think we could have the most perfect technology, and this is how we compete with more industry agnostic solutions that try to do what we do. First off, I think the coding is hard. So from an AI model perspective, the more narrow you can be, the better you can be. There's something about that. But it is challenging and difficult to integrate to these systems, which are not open ecosystems. They're closed system and have very particular, API challenges and limitations. And a lot of firms come from an outside perspective and do some sort of hacky FTP and just really the integration is an afterthought. But that's going to become the primary focus of your customer. If it worked great for 3 months, then it fails, and then you're stuck in this situation of, well, what made it into my system, what didn't, and I have to go troubleshoot these files that are loading every day. And then, exception management becomes quite difficult. So one of the key things we focused on was trying to make the integration to these core systems as seamless as possible. It's basically a checkbox to get started. You create an interface user, you check the box. And that was us working really closely with Yardi and MRI on the integration, being partners. And that's something where a lot of prop techs don't want to pay the money, don't want to do it right. They're thinking, oh, I can do this on my own. And I think ultimately you need to look at it from the perspective of your customer. The other part of it is any API, any integration is going to have issues. They're going to have failures. Things will time out. Things will duplicate. Things will just the nature of the internet, right? Things happen. And I think a lot of firms who are building technology don't do enough work on air handling, don't do enough work on inevitably making the core assumption that these failures will happen. And how do you make it as invisible as possible to the customer? And so for us, if we're using this API and we're pushing it thousands and thousands of things every day, sometimes, some small percent has an issue. We may get a complaint back to our tech department that says, oh, PredictAP is being slow today. It took me 10 minutes to get an invoice in there. And we say, sorry about that. We'll look at, we'll look into it, and we look into it. And oftentimes it's the API is timed out. The API is timed out. The API is timed out. And we're doing this in a logical, safe way to reapply these things. So eventually it gets in, or eventually we say, you know what, there's some issue with this one. Here's what the issue is. It's a dupe. It's an inactive, whatever it might be. And we take it on us as it's our fault, even though it may not necessarily be. But from the customer's perspective, this like, oh, it's their fault. It's their fault. If the customers don't care about that, the customers care about, is it reliable? Is it working? Is it ultimately getting there? And so that was a real North Star for our engineering teams, to have the connectivity be as resilient as possible and as error free. And also on the infrastructure side, I'm not sure if it made it to Europe, but last week or the week before, there was an AWS outage. The East Coast AWS went down, which hit a lot of
Yeah,
big companies, a lot of really
I
large
know too
companies.
much. Yeah, I
I
know.
was incredibly proud that we did not have an outage, right? Even though we are primarily hosted on AWS. My head of technology, so Chris Antonesi is my head of technology. I came from Apple. Was actually a buddy of mine from high school, and I was starting this company. I lured him away from Apple, but part of that was he had the opportunity to build tech the right way. We gave him a year and said, build proper infrastructure. And I will say that was one of the best things we did as well, is because first off, the way we've done DevOps and the ability to create and push code multiple times a day and resiliency and all of that as being a core part of our product, it allows us to track a lot of really solid engineers, because it's a very attractive DevOps environment to work on. And we've never had a significant, knock on wood here, but we've never had an outage, right? And so when things like that happen and there's a headline about the people being down and our customers are like, no, team's fine, we're like, great, happy to hear
Yeah,
that. So that is not by accident.
wonderful. Yeah, yeah. I, we never know what can happen, but what can you do? Have your server in your background in your
Exactly.
basement.
Yeah.
And what's the feedback from the team on the ground, controllers, AP clerks? Do they feel relieved or threatened by automation?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And I'd say it's actually an area we didn't do a good enough job focusing on at the start. So growing the company, we were selling, right? And so it's funny. My career changed. For 20 years, I was a buyer and problem solver. Now I'm a software salesman. It's funny how those things work. But we did a really good job talking about the value of this application from a top-down perspective, the CFO, the chief accounting officer, the controller, and everyone at a level understands this is painful. We have yet to see a company where we talk about AP coding. It's not the most glamorous problem. It's not self-driving cars or whatever the exciting use case for AI is, but it's a real frustrating problem for people. And so at a level, and sometimes maybe the CEO or the CFO is not aware how difficult it is, but somebody's dealing with that pain. And so we reach that person and they're like, oh my gosh, yes, this is great. It's always skepticism, right? Do you really integrate with Yardi and Nexus easily? Do you really code? Our coding's so crazy. We do this crazy thing. And it's always that skepticism, but we get them through that. We have 100 customers now, some very large, very complicated customers. So people, if anything, people overestimate the capabilities of AI now on what it can do. They expect miracles. But the bottoms up, the people doing the work day to day, is an area where I think there is a lot of fear and a lot of skepticism around that for a couple of reasons. So number one, I think AP is an incredibly hard role. And I frankly think the AP people are underpaid for what they do. It's a very high knowledge position where they have to know all these just complicated, detailed things. And it's not necessarily the highest paid position in a company. And so you kind of have this high knowledge, high stress. You're hit every day with this just wall of invoices that comes and never stops. And something I tell my engineers when they're building these things, like, think about this. You're doing this every day and it's coming at you. And how you create the user interface and move things, it's important. But high knowledge, high stress, high volume, not I don't think an appropriate level of pay for what they're doing. That leads to a lot of turnover, right? Because it is difficult. I also think there's a certain feeling, positive feeling from a job when the CFO has to ask me how to code something, right? I don't know how to code this bill. So there's certain um, uh, gain they get from their job that we threaten as well, right? So it's not only we threaten the job, but we're threatening the piece of the job that gives them a lot of positive feelings. And we've had to do a much better job of describing that we're a tool for you. We're augmenting you. We're helping you with the big chunk of things that are typical. We still need you to handle the atypical. And that's a message that takes some time to get across because people do feel threatened. They think that AI is coming to take my job. And AI absolutely is not ready to take people's jobs, right? Because again, it has the judgment problem. I think the reality is people with AI skills are going to take the jobs of people who don't have AI skills. If you're not using AI to augment what your capabilities are, then you're falling behind. And that's just even on a personal productivity, view. Are you helping with emails and all of that? And that's a really important aspect for communication is that you need to continue to work on your skills, and this is the tool for you. This is a very modern, very powerful tool to enable you to then go do other things. And my favorite email I've gotten is one of our customers, America West in California. They used to have two AP people, a small company. One position they had trouble filling, they couldn't fill it, and they had another person who'd done this for a long time, and she's just drowning in the work. This company also likes check runs, and they say they always do it on Fridays. The CFO likes to write checks still. We got an email 6 months into it. They said our check runs are Wednesday now. Never happened. 10 years plus. We didn't need to backfill that position, and the person that was doing this, they've been promoted to an accountant. Right? This is now just a part of their job. And most of it happens and she deals with the problems and then she's expanding her skill set and she's in a better position now. Like that to me is a win-win-win, right? Where your career is now able to move forward. You're doing more, making more money, things are better. The company is benefiting. And then everyone involved wins. And so I think that is the message that I would love to, get out there, that this is a tool to help you. Just like an analyst has Excel, just like everyone has tools. And I think this is just the tool for AP.
No, that's true. That's true. Makes sense. Okay, let's talk about the market. Who is the perfect fit client for you right now? What kind of team or situations?
Yeah. So we're selling to anyone who pays invoices, which pretty much everyone, but it's who we integrate with. So Yardi and Nexus right now. We're working on others like RealPage and AppFolio, but that's a work in progress. So traditionally it's REITs, so owner operators. So if you are, if you have a real estate asset and you're operating it, we also do some companies, we do just the corporate side. So there can be a lot of corporate expenses that happen. So some companies we do corporate, some we're doing just the property, some we're doing both. But it could be office, industrial, multifamily. We have a lot of success in senior living. It's interesting, senior living and multifamily, this job is typically done on site. So you can imagine if you were, Laurent, if you wanted a career change, like I want to manage an apartment complex in the US, it's like, okay, well, let's meet your 300 residents, or senior living, right? Even better, senior living. Let's meet your 300 residents. You have to know your residents. Let's meet my 30 employees. Let's meet my 100 vendors that do services here. Let's understand my companies, how they want to account. That's a monumental task. And so an invoice comes in, it's like, well, geez, like who's this vendor? What do they do? How does my company want to code it? That's a lot of time and knowledge to learn all that. When that really isn't the highest and best use of your time. Your highest and best use is understanding the tenants and giving them that, at home experience, or people looking to join the community. And so for those places where it's being done on site, it's because the knowledge is on site, and we've enabled that. Instead of 8 hours a week, it's 30 minutes, and now you can go do that other stuff. But anyone who owns real estate or service providers to those companies, so third-party service providers that handle property management or asset management, those firms as well, we've had success with.
Yeah, that's great. Are there sectors in real estate that are a faster adopter of automation than others?
I think it depends company by company. I don't think sector-wise. Maybe multifamily has adopted a lot more of the tenant-facing technology. So, leasing agents, chatbots. At least AI is a great company around chatbots. You already has a chat product as well, which is good. But I think multifamily has done it more quickly on the tenant-facing. I think Office has done it more on smart buildings, building access, tools that are enabling return to office. I think different sectors have different problems they focus on. And so that's where they're focusing their tech dollars. I think the nice thing for us is that we can help all industries. So maybe Office is struggling a little bit. We have more industrial and multifamily, or we even have clients who are data centers. And data centers are, they have their whole issue around, they're just growing like crazy, and lots of construction invoices and all of that. So for us, we are able to help all these folks, but I think the focus for different asset classes really depends on what their biggest problem is or what adds more value to them.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. You have raised funding, signed major clients, as you say, build traction. What has been the hardest part of getting the real
Oof.
estate teams to adopt AI?
Yeah. Yeah. And we were one of the first, we were truly one of the first movers in AI, because this started 6 years ago. This didn't start, 2 years ago when ChatGPT came out. And we actually got a patent in March on the concept, really cementing our status as first mover on this application. At the start, massive skepticism on whether it could work. The pendulum has swung the other way now, where everyone uses ChatGPT and they expect miracles. Uh, and that's actually been a different challenge. But I think the difficulty is really around change management. Is this the priority people want to deal with? Is there skepticism around how pain-free it'll be to get going? All of those things have been difficult. From a personal perspective, starting a company, raising money, it's difficult. You talk to hundreds of companies, and they all love you, and it's like, well, but which one actually wants to give you money? And you definitely find out who your friends are when you go from the buying side to the selling side. But there's been lots of challenges around that. But we have been successful. I think at the core, we have hit a great problem, have a good solution, and I've really tried to make this, PredictAP different than the typical PropTech experience. And that's by focusing on customer service, by focusing on the integration, by focusing on the details that really impact the user's day to day, where I think it's an afterthought. I think oftentimes firms focus so much on what they want to do well at, and they do it well, but they don't think about the connective tissue to that and how much that really colors the experience of the user. And I think that's where we can miss the mark. I could have perfect predictions on everything, but if it the load fails every day, well, people are not going to be happy. So I think that's been a challenge as well to get that to work the way I want it to work.
To now, let's zoom out. And what do you see as the biggest opportunity for real estate finance in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, at a high level, I still think a lot of folks are doing a lot of manual process. So I think automating payments, bringing that in. I do think that you're going to need, so AI has positives and negatives. And I'll say maybe some of the earliest adopters of AI are bad actors, people who want to defraud you and steal your money. The level of sophistication with fraud and targeted and really personal, just like the personalization of coding of that, they can personalize the attacks that come at you. And so I think that, and this is an area of using AI to detect fraud, detect deep fakes and things like that, like understanding, is that really the CFO on the Zoom? Yeah, that stuff's coming. And so I think there's going to be an area around kind of AI security and tooling. I still think there's a lot of non-AI applications around payment automation, automatic bank rec, and just the back office, not glamorous, but I think they're calling it office of the CFO, but just a lot of important fundamental tasks that need to be automated so that the accountants can look, because what you want, your accountants shouldn't be just fully focused on looking in the rearview mirror and telling you this is what happened. Where everyone has always wanted to get to is be able to have this clear view of the future, to look at my risks and look at my opportunities. And you need time to do that. And so as you can take this catching up to the past and getting numbers to the present more quickly, more accurately, more consistently, it allows folks to look for problems, discrepancies, and then that kind of opportunities and risks looking forward. And so I think this office of the CFO automation on finance and accounting is just at its infancy. And we're going to see a lot of really great applications in that, and how we do internal audit, how we do accruals, how we do just general closing the books in accounting. I think that's going to change a lot in the next couple of years. Plus this kind of fraud side, I think, is going to change a lot in a couple of years.
Will AP be fully automated, or are human always be part of the loop?
That's a good question. I would say there's a technology capability, and I think it's reasonable to get 95% plus automated. And we see that with some of our best clients that do a lot of best practice and all of that. Maybe you get to 97, 98, 99, but there's always going to be one-off exceptions. I think the bigger part is, again, back to fraud, back to, having judgment. I think you may not necessarily want to have full automation, because if that happens, there will be massive fraud, right? Someone will understand a weakness in your process, someone will understand a hole in your control and exploit it. And there'll be a headline that says, XYZ company lost $100 million because, someone changed a wire instruction and they waited, and someone had a legitimate bill came in and then it went, So the more remove humans from the loop, you do gain efficiency, but there's a diminishing return when you create holes in security. And I do think a good payment process has human review and control just to prevent that, right? Like if you think about, the nuclear weapons in the United States are not on the internet, right? They still have the floppy disks, right? And that's intentional obsolescence, right? There's an intention behind not connecting these things because, it's scary. And so I think with some of these processes, yes, you can automate to a very high degree, but you need to be very intentional on where humans go. And I think the nice part about it is now, well, maybe I'm not looking at 100% of all entities, but maybe I'm looking at specific ones that are higher risk, lower confidence, or something has changed, or it's material. And now I'm paying a lot more attention to those 15 items I have to look at, as opposed to the 1,000 items I used to handle, where I'm not really looking at anything, so I'm just pushing it through. So I think that'd be my recommendation: is you find the right level of review and be intentional with it, but still keep the human in the loop.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Are there any other workflows you're thinking about beyond AP?
Yeah, it's a good question. We are touching on, so we do want to really maintain our laser focus. Talking about venture capitalists, or they're, you talk to them like, well, you should do this in every industry. You should do. They want you to get very broad, so you can do that. I think the next area we're going to get into, which is interesting, is I'll call it accounting intelligence. Oftentimes people think of the accounting ledger, the finance ledger, as the truth because you report on it, and from a certain perspective, absolutely, it's the truth, for better or for worse. The reality is there's some level of loss of granularity between the paper and the ledger. So an easy example of this could be, hey, utility bill comes in, that's $10,000, and utilities are rough. If you're a day late, they're going to charge a late fee, and you're going to pay it because you don't want your electricity turned off at a big, office building. $10,000 of electric, say it's $1,000 late fee. How is that hitting your ledger? I can say with a pretty high degree of confidence, probably hitting your ledger as $11,000 of electric. Now think about that. So now my thing says $11,000 of electric. Oh, I had a little bit of a variance in electric. Must have been a hot July. But the reality is, well, you had $1,000 of a controllable expense that you could have dealt with. And what is that in aggregate? Maybe you do that 30 times in a month. Well, now I have $30,000 a month going out the door that I could control, but it's invisible because it's been coded in a way that it looks like, and it's not necessarily right or wrong, but it's less granular than it should be. So I don't have as much information. And I think a lot of times the CFOs are at such a high level that a lot of the big variations and fluctuations below are put in a way that minimizes variances and exceptions. And on average, everything's okay, but you're losing opportunities to get efficiency, control expenses and doing that. And so we have a really good understanding of what's on the paper. And I think we could highlight to folks when something looks abnormal, right? That plumber that was $200 an hour was $600 an hour. Well, you should go look at that. Uh, you have a line item for snow removal, but you bought televisions there. Well, that's kind of odd. Why did you do that? Like, go look at that. And so I think this accounting intelligence of understanding where there's a difference between what's on the paper and what hit the ledger is a real good opportunity for us because we have a really good understanding of what that accounting should be.
That's great. What's what's your long-term vision for PredictAP?
Yeah, long term, I'm not such a long term my partner is much more long term focused on that. I just want to be really, I want us to be the absolute best solution to coding invoices. It's not a very ambitious thing, but I feel like
Oh,
if we do that well, everything else will take care of itself. I want to have a company where my employees are taken care of, and like we pay 100% of healthcare. And part of the things of when I made a company, I wanted to do it the way I would like to be treated. And so I think having a place where the employees feel happy and comfortable and are compensated well, they enjoy it, where our customers are happy, where I'm getting emails about people being promoted and moving forward. We're solving a problem, we're doing it well, and we are good at what we do. And that's my ambition for now. And I think that will, that's my goal. I always had this. Well, my first boss always told me, is Neil Weisner. He's one of the CFOs at a portco at Colony, but he told me like my naivete of how things will work out has always been my superpower. And it's like, I always just envision things will work out, right, for the best. And so really, I think the short-term view of doing that stuff well will lead us to a good long-term place. And that's really the hope for me.
I love it. Oh, this is great. David, this was excellent. Thank you for sharing your time, your insight, and the story behind PredictAP. If people want to follow your work or learn more about the company, where should they?
Yeah, so please go to predictap.com. We have a blog too, and I try to make blog content that's actually interesting and useful around like how to actually it's not necessarily about PredictAP. It's about, accounting and finance and like talk about purchase orders and how people use them and things like that. So check out the blog there. I try to be active on LinkedIn. And again, sharing things that are useful. So look me up, Dave Stifter on LinkedIn. And I'm at conferences as well. So going to OpTech next month. I am on the lookout for any. I'm gonna have an interesting event there where I'm going to do a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu event. So I'm trying to find different events there with it's actually someone from Europe. Adam Wazinski is a Polish gentleman who's the world champion. So we're going to do an event at OpTech with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champ Adam Wazinski. So catch us there. And then yeah, so I think those are good places to find me.
Fantastic, fantastic. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. It was great.
Yep.
Thank you,
Thank you.
David.
Bye.
Thank you. And that's it for today's episode of AI InterConnect. And if you enjoyed it, share it with someone who is building the future, or better yet, someone who should be. And until next time, stay curious, stay creative, and keep building. Thank you.